Hi students, so this video is going to help you complete the final draft of your Antigone essay. If you follow the following editing steps, it will take your first draft and turn it into a more perfect second and final draft. So the first thing that you should edit is your thesis. So upon your first editing pass, let's check on your thesis. So your thesis could read similar to this example. While Creon does make good points through the law, Antigone is ultimately correct in burying Polynices because she had religious and social reasoning on her side. This thesis says that Creon is sort of right, but Antigone is more right. There is also another thesis where you could say Creon is completely wrong and Antigone is completely right. You could write a thesis that says Antigone is sort of right, but Creon is more right. Or you could have a thesis that says Antigone is completely wrong, while Creon is completely right. So there's 4 different variations of theses that you could potentially write. However, all of them are going to follow a very similar format. It's going to begin with the transition, state the opposition and perspective that you'll focus on for the opposition. It will then have a comma, and then you'll state your position and the 2 perspectives you will use to prove your position. So for instance, the transition could be while, through, and since. Your opposition could say Creon does make good points. Antigone's actions were completely unjustified. Antigone has a reasonable social argument. Antigone arrogantly failed to respect any Theban laws. Those are stating your opposition. Then you state your perspectives. Law, religion, social, law. Then don't forget your comma. Comma, 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 comma. Next comes the position where you state your position. Antigone is ultimately correct. Antigone's argument to bury her brother is justified. Creon's refusal to allow Polynices a burial is fair. Creon's decision to deny her brother a burial is fair. And then you state your 2 perspectives with which you'll prove your position. Religious and social, social and ethical, ethical and political, ethical and social. So make sure that you follow this formula to create an excellent thesis. So, upon your second editing pass, you should make sure that your opposition paragraph is what it is, what it needs to be. So your opposition paragraph should explain your opposition's point of view and ultimately why they're wrong. For this opposition paragraph, however, we're going to focus in on specifically the topic sentence. So take a look at your opposition paragraph's topic sentence. That should be the very first sentence of your second paragraph. A topic sentence might read, while Creon is ultimately not correct in denying Antigone the right to bury her brother, his arguments are still legally correct. This introduces what I'm trying to prove and how I will prove it. I'm going to prove that Creon is not ultimately correct, sort of correct. I'm going to do this through legal examples. Now, the things you need to check for your topic sentence include, does your topic sentence match the thesis? If my thesis reads, while Creon does make good points through the law, Antigone is ultimately correct in burying Polynices because she had religious and social reasoning on her side, my first body paragraph is going to be about how Creon makes good points through the law. My second body paragraph will be how Antigone makes good points through religion. And my third body paragraph will be about how Antigone makes good points through her social reasoning. Paragraph 1, 2, and 3. Those are what my topic sentences should introduce. So if this is the topic sentence of my first paragraph, the opposition paragraph, it should match the opposition section of my thesis. My opposition section of my thesis states, while Creon does make good points through law. That matches, Creon is ultimately not correct in denying Antigone, and also his arguments are still legally correct. They match. Check. My thesis succeeds and my thesis matches my topic sentence. Next, does my position remain clear in my topic sentence? Yes. because I say, while Creon is not ultimately correct in denying Antigone the right to bury her brother, I'm not saying that Creon is right, because that's not what I believe. I believe Antigone is right. But I am being reasonable by saying that Creon makes some good points. So my position remains clear. My readers aren't going to be confused when reading my paragraphs because one says Creon's right and the other says Antigone's right. I'm clearly stating that I believe Antigone is more right than Creon. Now make sure you just don't check the topic sentence of your opposition paragraph. You should check the topic sentences of all three of your body paragraphs. Make sure that they all match your thesis and they all clearly state the position of your essay. So make sure, check the elements that are circled in red for each of your topic sentences. Now, on your third pass for editing, you do need to check your position paragraphs, and specifically the evidence that you use in them. You will use evidence in your opposition paragraph and both of your position paragraphs. Therefore, while we're specifically going to talk about evidence for your position paragraph, you should check the evidences in all of your body paragraphs to make sure they are correct. So my evidence section might read, for instance, Antigone explains to Creon that the gods support her decision to bury Polynices. Zeus did not announce those laws to me, and justice, living with the gods below, sent no such laws for men. I did not think anything which you proclaim strong enough to let a mortal override the gods and their unwritten and unchanging laws. Sophocles 16. So, the first thing you need to check is, do you have a transition? So if you take a look at my evidence, it begins with a transition. Evidences can begin with, for instance, for example, an important moment occurs when, also, additionally, and so forth. Each of your body paragraphs should, if you're going for an A, have two pieces of evidence. It should go topic sentence, evidence, elaboration, wrap up. Therefore, you will have two transitions for your two different evidences. So my first piece of evidence in my position paragraph might say, for instance, and my second transition for my second piece of evidence might say also. Now next, for the tag phrase, you need to make sure that you precede your quote with words that provide details concerning the context of the quote, explains who is speaking, whom they may be speaking to, and what they are saying. So I write, Antigone explains to Creon that the gods support her decision to bury Polynices. Now, when my readers go and read my quote, they know what to expect from it. Next, the quote. The quote needs to make sense as a complete sentence. So if I just had, Zeus did not announce those laws to me, period, that wouldn't give me enough information. If I just had, Zeus did not announce those laws to me and justice living, that's an incomplete sentence. That doesn't make sense. I need all this information to convey the necessary amount of information in a complete way. So, check. Does the quote need to be longer? Does it need to be shorter? Does it provide evidence relevant to the purpose of the paragraph, or could the writer find a better quote? Last but not least, please check your in-text citation. Check the location of the period. It should come at the very end. Check the location of the quotation marks. They should come before the in-text citation. Check if there are parentheses. Check if the author's name is present in only the first in-text citation of your essay. You only have one author, so you don't need to put the author's name every time. And then make sure you have the page number. There is no comma. There is no PG dot. This is how it should look. Now, for your fourth pass, let's check clarity and elaboration. So you should have elaboration in all three body paragraphs of your essay, and it should follow each piece of your evidence. Because remember, it goes topic sentence, evidence, elaboration, wrap up. So now we're going to talk about the elaboration that should be in all three of your body paragraphs. So my elaboration reads, Antigone believes that the law of the gods is stronger than the laws of man, because her time spent in the afterlife is much longer than that on earth. Therefore, she is willing to disobey Creon's laws because he can only punish her when she is alive. In the afterlife, she will be rewarded by the gods for eternity. This is why she does not feel guilt nor fear for burying her brother, because she knows the gods support her actions. Now, what does your elaboration need to do? Well, first, you need to make sure that it's consistent with the quote that precedes it. So your evidence needs to be about the same thing that your elaboration is about. The purpose of your elaboration is to explain what your quote means, why it's important, and how it relates to the rest of the essay. So, make sure to check that your elaboration is appropriate. Next, purpose. Does the elaboration explain how the quote proves the purpose of the essay? It can't just explain what the quote is saying. It needs to actually create an argument using the quote. And last but not least, clarity, the big one. Check if the elaboration has a clear argument. That's the most important part, creating an argument. Arguments are almost always more than one sentence because it needs to explain a thought process. Check if the author takes the reader step by step through a thought process to prove their point. Check if the author uses transition words to help readers through the step-by-step process, such as here I use the word therefore. I also use the transition in the afterlife. I also use words like because to further prove my point. Also, check if the argument makes sense and if it's convincing. Next, for your 5th edit pass, you need to write an awesome conclusion to end your awesome essay. So the first thing you need to do is restate your thesis. Now, if my original thesis is, though Antigone has a reasonable social argument, Creon's refusal to allow Polynices a burial is fair due to the ethical and political implications. My restated thesis should say the same thing, but it should be much more specific to the essay that separated my first thesis to my second thesis. You've given a lot of information between these sentences, and therefore your second sentence should reflect that information that's been provided. So here I write, Antigone makes sound points with her social argument concerning honoring the desires of the Theban people. This is a more detailed way of saying Antigone has a reasonable social argument, where I state what her social argument is. Then in my restated thesis I write, however, Creon is ultimately not correct to bury Polynices, because Polynices did attack the city, endangering people's lives, and because Creon has legitimate rights to create the laws of Thebes. This is a more elaborate way to state that Creon was right ethically and politically, where I clarify how he was correct ethically and how he was correct politically. So make sure that your restated thesis is more thorough, reflecting what you've written in your body paragraphs. Now, for the last part of your conclusion, you need to make sure that you include ethos, pathos, and logos to end on a very strong note. So for instance, if you read through this sample, you will see that there is pathos, which calls on the emotions of the reader, ethos, that calls on the morality of the reader, and logos, which calls on the logic of the reader. Please feel free to pause the video and read through this conclusion so that you can understand how to utilize ethos, pathos, and logos in your own conclusion. Now, last but not least, I'm going to specifically check for comma rules. The first comma rule I'm going to check for is, did you put a comma after your transition? So when you say, for instance, for example, also, in addition to, however, there should be a comma after that transition. Please make sure that you do that. Comma rule 2, before the quote. So please note that when in your evidence you have a quote, there should be a comma before that quote. No comma here, no comma here, no commas there, a comma here, before you start your quote. The next comma rule you need to make sure you follow is before conjunctions. Conjunctions include words like because, which, and the classic fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. For instance, here you see that I have a comma before the word because. Make sure to have those commas there. Next, around interruptions. So you might be like, what do you mean around interruptions? Take a look at this sentence. Antigone, the daughter of Oedipus, lived a very difficult life growing up, having lost both her mother and father to tragedy. The daughter of Oedipus interrupts my sentence. If it wasn't there, my sentence would still make sense, and therefore I need to put commas around that interruption. And last but not least, make sure when you're listing, you put commas in your list. All right,